Well, hello. Look what I just got. I know what you're thinking. Dude, why did you spend so much money on those fantastic looking Artist Opus dry brushes? Well, haha! I didn't. These are some cheap knockoffs. Well, cheap knockoffs. I gotta say, I'm pretty curious about these because they look a lot like those Artist Opus brushes that I've kind of dreamed about for a while. But they don't have the Artist Opus price tag. And okay, I didn't spend $1 billion. That's what they cost, right? But the question is, do they work? I don't know. I spent my money, so potentially you don't have to. Hello everyone, welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I am George. And today we're going to test these kind of knockoff paintbrushes that I got on Amazon.com. This is the one I got. And so they're cheap compared to the Artist Opus, which are right here. But they're not cheap compared to other brushes. Other brushes being, non-brand name hobbyist brushes, right? Like just your normal Amazon brushes that a lot of us use because, let's face it, nobody's got the kind of money to buy really expensive brushes. I've gotten pretty familiar with dry brushing because it's become my favorite technique because it's fast, it's easy. It's easy-ish. It can be kind of difficult sometimes in some applications. But for me, I like dry brushing because it delivers consistent results, at least for my skill level, right? I'm no good at blending, I'm not really good at glazing, and what else is left? Well, dry brushing. Dry brushing gets you to the point where with, relatively modest skill levels, you can get a really nice looking model with a huge range of contrast between your shadows and your highlights. For all of my projects so far, I've used a combination of 3 brushes. This is a cosmetics brush I happened to find at the grocery store while I was looking, and it looked like it might do the job, and it does. It does a pretty good job, but it's a little inconsistent because the bristles, they're kind of soft, and they absorb a lot of moisture, so I kind of have to work a little harder to make this dry. And inevitably, the very first couple of brush strokes have too much paint on them. After I can correct it, and after a little while it gets pretty consistent and I'm fine. And so this has been my workhorse brush. It doesn't have a name, so I can't even tell you which one to get. Now, I can't use this brush for every project, or at least every component of the project, because this is a pretty big brush, and sometimes you want to dry brush or highlight or mid-tone or whatever, kind of smaller surface areas. And for those, this is a Citadel Color dry brush. Dry 5 it says, and I really should put on my readers for this. This is a Army Painter small dry brush. And they do okay, but because they don't have a ton of surface area, it's really inconsistent, and as you can see, this one got frayed, and it got frayed pretty quickly. I've got these kind of at the same time, and this one got beat up really fast, and so this was getting close to useless because it's hard to aim at the point that I want to do. This one is less useless, but it's still kind of unpredictable. Long story short, I needed a smaller dry brush. So I'm hoping these will fit the bill, but there were 5 in this pack, and there were 5 in the other kind of knockoff Artist Opus dry brush sets that I saw on Amazon, and Artist Opus has 5. So today I'm going to test all of these brushes, well, at least some of the big ones and some of the small ones, to see if they do the trick. Do they do a better job than these? Because these weren't free, and they also weren't dirt cheap. I'm kind of hoping that these do a better job than these, at least a noticeable amount. Now, the question of, are they as good as the Artist Opus? I'm just going to go ahead and assume no, because I am not going to buy the Artist Opus brushes to test them against these things. If you've got that kind of money, feel free to send them my way. I'm kidding, don't send me any stuff. Alright, enough jibber jabber. Let's start dry brushing these. These are some pieces of terrain that have so far escaped my mad efforts at repainting all my terrain pieces. This one's not so bad compared to what they used to look like, but it's still not like this one that I did in a very recent video. So I'm going to repaint it to look like this and the other 3 or 4 of them that are like this that are kind of lying around. I'm also going to repaint these because, let's face it, they look pretty gross. And as long as I'm redoing all my terrain pieces, I might as well. I'm going to lay down some prime and I'm going to start dry brushing right now. Alright, so this video isn't about actual dry brushing, but more about the brushes, so I'll keep this short and sweet. I prepared my dry palette with some shining silver and darkened it up with some black. This is my recipe when I don't want to use a ton of my gunmetal or bolt metal metallic. I make my own, basically. So I dab on my brush just a little bit, make sure it's nice and dry, but not too dry. I don't want it bone dry. I want a little bit of dampness in there. I load it up with the paint that I've prepared, and I run the loaded brush up and down the texture palette so that I can leave most of that paint behind. And then I hit brush to model, and I kind of go a couple of different directions depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Your brush strokes do matter. In this case, I'm going to apply the paint with just a bunch of little circles, the occasional up and down, just kind of depending. I don't care about a specific pattern here. I want just a generalized metallic sheen over the black. I'm not trying to replicate the direction of light fall. So on other models, that's important. In this one, I want more of a generalized thing. I want to make sure that some of the crevices, some of the recessed parts still get some of that sheen. I'm not looking for a stark, complete absence of paint on this. Right off the bat, I noticed that I have to give the model a lot more passes than I'm used to. Usually a couple of passes is enough to leave kind of a lot of paint behind. But this brush is kind of stingy with the paint. But in a good way. It leaves me more control. I think adding more passes of dry brush over the model, it gives you more control. There's nothing worse than putting the dry brush onto the model and you find out too late that it's too wet. This is nice and dry. I have to load it a couple of times in order to leave behind enough of the dry paint on the model, and I think that's a good thing. Obviously, your mileage may vary, but at least the way I use it, and on these big models, these pieces of terrain, I think it's a good thing. Now for this application, I've used the whitest of the dry brushes, and I've used kind of a medium-sized one, just to kind of see that they both work similarly, and they do. All right. So I've got my beautiful white brushes. They're all dirty, but that means they've done their job. So what are my impressions? Well, first off, let's take a look at the job that they did. And so this is a very simple dry brush. If you've seen some of my recent videos, you'll see this show up again and again. This looks very, very similar to my previous efforts. Obviously, it doesn't have any of the details yet, but just the dry brush piece of it. And I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. But that's not the point of this video, right? The point of this video was the brushes themselves. I really like them. I like them so much. I wish I had bought these when I first started playing, or when I first started painting Warhammer 40K. It has the potential, I think, to kind of transform your dry brushing results. I mean, at least depends on what you have right now, right? If you have something like this, even this, this is pretty decent. This gets the job done, but it's inconsistent. These, and I haven't tried all of them yet. Like I have the small ones yet to try. I don't know if they're going to work the same. I'm going to do another project in this video to kind of get a full idea. But the results are super consistent. Like when you load up the brush and it's very thirsty, it will absorb a lot of paint and it will retain a lot of paint. And so the first couple of times you pass over it, it feels like it's very dry. Dry isn't the right word because it doesn't leave behind any powdery stuff. When you rub it on the surface, it feels like it doesn't leave much behind, at least compared to this. Now, that seems like a weird thing to say is a good thing, but it is, because when I do it with this, if the brush is too damp, or even if I just loaded it and didn't dry it sufficiently, it'll leave a big old streak of too much paint on there, and then I have to go back and try to clean it up. It's a whole thing. Eventually, you know, the brush will settle down, I will settle down with the brush, and I'll get to a good place. But with these, it deposits a very thin layer of paint, and it does so consistently. So that, oh, you know what, I didn't get enough. Well, you know what, I'll just keep going over it. You know what, I'm going to load again. That's still not enough. Load again. Still not enough. And then, hey, that's good. Without leaving huge streaks of wet paint. And that is an awesome quality in a dry brush, and that is something that this doesn't do particularly well, although it does do a good job eventually. These don't do a good job of at all. So, my cosmetics brush, it's replaced. These have a permanent spot in my toolkit. This, I'll leave it for backup in case my dog gets hungry and decides to destroy this. Next, I'm going to try some of these, and for that, I'm going to need some actual models, not terrain, but legit models. Be right back. So the test on this next model, I'm using a Space Marines Hero Captain from the Space Marines Terminators kind of series. I've had some left over that I hadn't worked on, and I decided to use this model to use the dry brushing technique to kind of paint them up as much as I can. Obviously, I'm not going to do the details because I'm just looking to do the dry brushing components. And I think this is going to be the real test of these brushes, because the first thing that I did was the terrain, and that isn't quite as important. It's supposed to be messy, brutalist, and minimalist at the same time. This is supposed to be more delicate. This is a hero model. And more importantly, I get to test the smaller diameter brushes. And the smaller diameter brushes was really why I went this route. That's the specific problem I wanted to solve. I wanted to dry brush small areas in my, for my models, so that even some of the details, at least some of the larger details, could have that dry brushed appearance. And while the big stuff, so the body and the cape, all that big stuff, the brushes worked amazing. They worked really well. In fact, here they weren't necessarily that much better than what I had previously been using, but they're more consistent, they're more accurate, there's fewer mistakes, and it was less effortful to get a decent result. My only complaint, and this is more of a me thing, my only complaint is even the smaller brushes were too big to get into the really tight areas like the tabard to do a decent job of dry brushing. Having said that, with this set of brushes, I was able to dry brush a lot more of this model, and relatively quickly, than I have been in the past. So again, this is a solid win. Test is done, and in fairly short order I have a couple of pieces of terrain, and probably more importantly pretty good start, now that I fixed my lighting, a pretty good start on a Space Marines captain. Everything you see here has been applied with a dry brush. And I'm like, I'd say 90% done, but it's in terms of time, because the time I want to spend on the detailing, it's probably closer to 80, maybe 85%, depending on how much detail I want to put in. But most of it is done, and it doesn't look half bad. In fact, it looks pretty darn good if you ask me. Certainly on par with some of the best work I've ever done. Look at this cape. This is all dry brushed. I couldn't do this by blending or glazing. It's just beyond my skill level. But just a few minutes with a dry brush and here we are. And the thing is, the place where these brushes helped me the most was in minimizing the many, many mistakes that I make when I dry brush. I routinely make mistakes. I routinely leave too much paint in a single pass. Like the very first time I make a contact with the model, it's too much paint, it's too wet, sometimes it's too watery, and with these brushes, I made very, very few. I did leave kind of a watery mess at one point with the, when I was doing the white, the kind of the first layer of white on this helmet, but you can't tell now. It looks pretty good. I'm super surprised. I fully intended that this whole video was going to be a joke, and I was just going to say, ha ha, I wasted my money. How much did I pay for these? Yeah, haha, I wasted my money. I spent $9 on 6 brushes, not the 5 I had mentioned before. I wasn't expecting to be telling you guys that this is a good purchase, but it's a good purchase. I am shocked, and I'm going to use the crud out of these. Now, I am not making any claims about how long they're going to last. Maybe the 5th time I use these, they're going to be garbage, they're going to fall apart. I have no idea. But for now, my initial impressions, if you are currently using these and you're happy with them, it's fine. Keep using them. But if you're curious about maybe having something that'll help you just up your game a little bit more or make your life a little easier, and you got $10 in your pocket that you don't need to put somewhere else, this isn't bad. No, scratch that. This is really darn good, which makes me wonder if the Artist Opus brushes inspired these knockoffs to come out. Are the Artist Opus brushes even better than these? Crap. Suddenly, those really expensive brushes are no longer on my hell no, never list. Now they're on my maybe list. Where am I going to keep all these brushes? Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something. I certainly did. What else is there to say? Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. And maybe get some brushes. Peace.